We'd been obsessed with abandoned buildings for as long as I could remember. There was something about the peeling paint, the long-forgotten rooms, and the eerie silence that made those places feel like the past had been frozen in time. It was thrilling, though I never really understood why my friends loved it so much. For me, it wasn't the buildings themselves, but rather the shared adrenaline rush that kept me tagging along. Abandoned hospitals, though, that was where I drew the line. There was something particularly unsettling about hospitals. Perhaps it was the knowledge that they had once been places of sickness, death, and pain. That night, we found ourselves outside one of the largest abandoned hospitals on the outskirts of town. The hospital had been closed for over a decade, and according to local rumors, it had been the site of all sorts of illegal experiments, unsanctioned treatments, and unexplained disappearances. The perfect place for my friends to explore. "I don't think we should go in," I said, my voice wavering as I watched my friends shine their flashlights toward the hospital's looming silhouette. The tall, crumbling structure was shrouded in darkness, its shattered windows staring out like hollow eyes. My best friend, Jake, was the first to laugh, shaking his head. "Come on, man. It's just an old hospital. You've been in worse places. Don't chicken out now." "I'm not chickening out," I muttered, shoving my hands into my pockets. The truth was, I didn't want to be the coward of the group, but there was something different about this place. It felt wrong. The air was heavy with an unnatural stillness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Emily and Chris, the other two members of our tight-knit group, had already made up their minds. They exchanged excited grins, their flashlights cutting through the night as they headed for the front entrance. "You coming or not?" Chris called over his shoulder. He was already halfway up the cracked stone steps that led to the front door, his voice echoing in the still night. I hesitated, staring at the hospital's darkened windows. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, to leave while I still could. But the thought of standing outside, alone, while my friends ventured into the unknown felt just as terrifying. "Fine," I muttered, forcing myself to follow them. "But I'm not staying in there long." The door groaned as Jake pushed it open, the rusted hinges protesting the intrusion. A foul, musty odor hit us immediately, a mix of decay, rot, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Jesus," Emily muttered, covering her nose. "This place smells like death." Jake smirked, unfazed. "Adds to the atmosphere, doesn't it?" I rolled my eyes, but my unease only grew as we stepped inside. The hallway beyond the entrance was pitch black, our flashlights barely illuminating the peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. Old hospital beds, long forgotten and rusted, lined the walls. The faint, almost ghostly, sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere deep within the building. "Let's split up," Jake suggested, grinning like a kid in a candy store. "We'll cover more ground that way." "No way," I said immediately. "We stick together." Chris laughed. "What are you afraid of, man? It's not like there's anyone here." I bit my tongue, forcing down the growing dread in my chest. The truth was, I didn't know what I was afraid of, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't as alone as Chris thought. "Fine," Jake said, rolling his eyes. "We'll stay together. But if we don't find anything interesting, we're coming back here tomorrow night, and you're not getting out of it." I nodded, glad to have at least won that small argument. We moved deeper into the hospital, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The further we went, the colder the air became, as if the building itself was sucking the warmth out of the atmosphere. We passed long abandoned patient rooms, the beds stripped bare, old medical equipment strewn about, as if the hospital had been evacuated in a hurry. The walls were covered in graffiti, the windows shattered, letting in a cool breeze that sent chills down my spine. It was a labyrinth. Every corner we turned led to another hallway, another set of decaying rooms. The deeper we went, the more my anxiety grew. "I don't like this," I muttered under my breath, my eyes darting around nervously. Emily shined her flashlight at me, the beam casting long shadows on the walls. Relax. It's just an old building. Yeah, but it doesn't feel right. Before anyone could respond, Jake stopped dead in his tracks, his flashlight focused on something at the end of the hallway. Hey, check this out. We all crowded behind him, following the beam of light to a door at the far end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, the nameplate on the door faded and unreadable. Let's see what's inside, Jake said, his voice full of anticipation. Against my better judgment, I followed them as they approached the door. Jake pushed it open, revealing a large, dark room beyond. As soon as we stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The room was cold, far colder than the rest of the hospital. Our breath came out in foggy puffs, and the air had a strange, metallic taste to it. There was a low humming sound, barely audible, coming from somewhere deep within the building. Is it just me? Or is it freezing in here? Emily asked, rubbing her arms. It's weird, Chris muttered, shining his flashlight around the room. There shouldn't be any power, but I can hear something. Maybe it's an old generator, Jake suggested, though even he sounded uncertain. Or the wind blowing through the pipes. I stepped further into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. Something felt off. There was a strange tension in the air, like the atmosphere was pressing down on me. Guys! Emily called out, her voice suddenly trembling. Over here. We all turned, following her gaze to the corner of the room. That's when we saw it. A large, black bag. It looked like a body bag, crumpled in the corner, barely visible in the dim light. And something was sticking out of it, a hand. My stomach twisted as I realized what we were looking at. Is that a body? Chris asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake stepped forward, his flashlight shaking in his hand. No way! It's probably just... But before he could finish his sentence, I knew the truth. There was no mistaking the sight of a decomposed, pale hand sticking out of that bag. Whoever it was, they had been here a long time. I don't think we should be here, I said, backing away slowly. We need to call the police. Wait, Jake said, his voice tense. We don't even know what this is yet. Are you kidding me? I snapped. It's a dead body, Jake. We can't just hang around here. But Jake wasn't listening. He crouched down next to the bag, his flashlight aimed at the face of the corpse. He pulled back the bag slightly, revealing the decaying features of a man who had been dead for years. Chris gagged, turning away, while Emily stared, frozen in shock. I've seen this guy before, Jake muttered, frowning. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling. He was in the news, Jake said, his expression grim. They were looking for him years ago. His name's Evan Walker. He disappeared back in 2008. I felt my blood run cold. Evan Walker. The name rang a bell, though I couldn't place it immediately. A man who had been missing for over a decade was now lying dead in front of us, his body hidden away in an abandoned hospital. This isn't right, Emily whispered, backing away from the body. We need to get out of here. We need to call someone. For once, I agreed with her. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But something was holding us there, some dark, inexplicable force that seemed to be watching us from the shadows. Jake, however, was still staring at the body, his expression unreadable. Jake, I said, my voice tight with fear. We need to go. He stood up slowly, his flashlight still trained on the corpse. There's something weird about this. Weird, Chris repeated, his voice shaking. We just found a dead body, man. What could possibly be weirder than that? Jake turned to us, his face pale in the dim light. He's been missing since 2008, right? But look at him. He's not that decomposed. It's like he's only been dead for a few weeks, maybe months. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the body again. Jake was right. The corpse didn't look like it had been there for over a decade. But that didn't make any sense. We need to call the police, Emily insisted, pulling out her phone. We can't stay here. But as she tried to dial, her phone screen flickered and then went black. What the hell? Mine's dead too, Chris said, checking his phone. I had 80% battery just a few minutes ago. I pulled out my own phone, only to find that it was also dead. Something's wrong, I muttered, my heart pounding in my chest. We need to get out of here. We turned to leave, but as we approached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. We were trapped. Panic set in. I rushed to the door, pounding on it with my fists, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something or someone was keeping us inside. This isn't happening, Chris muttered, backing away from the door. This can't be happening. Calm down, Jake said, though even he sounded unnerved. We'll find another way out. I didn't respond. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had the door shut on its own? And why were all of our phones suddenly dead? We need to stick together, Emily said, her voice trembling. We'll find another exit. There has to be another way out of this place. But as we turned to explore the rest of the hospital, the humming sound we had heard earlier grew louder. It was no longer a faint, distant noise. It was close, too close, like it was coming from the walls themselves. What the hell is that? I asked, my eyes darting around the room. I don't know, Jake replied, his voice tense. But we need to keep moving. We made our way through the dark, twisting hallways, the flashlight beams flickering in the cold, damp air. Every step we took seemed to echo through the building, and the deeper we went, the stronger the sense of unease became. There was something in the hospital, something that didn't want us to leave. Do you feel that? Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Feel what? Chris asked, glancing around nervously. Like we're being watched, she replied. Like there's something here with us. I felt it too. The weight of unseen eyes, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on us. It wasn't just fear. There was something in this hospital, something malevolent, and it was watching our every move. We continued down the hallway, our footsteps echoing through the empty space. The deeper we went, the more the hospital seemed to change. The walls, once covered in peeling paint, now seemed darker, almost as if they were decaying before our eyes. The air grew colder, and the strange humming sound that had been following us grew louder, more insistent. I don't like this, Emily muttered, rubbing her arms. Something's not right. As if on cue, a faint whisper echoed through the hallway. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it quickly grew louder, more distinct. Did you hear that? I asked, my voice shaking. We all stopped, listening intently. The whispering continued, growing louder and louder until it seemed to fill the entire hallway. Help us! The voice was faint, distorted, but it was unmistakable. It was coming from somewhere deep within the hospital, echoing through the empty halls. Who's there? Jake called out, his voice trembling. There was no response, only the continued whispering, growing more insistent by the second. Help us, please. I felt a chill run down my spine. The voice sounded desperate, pleading, but there was something off about it, something inhuman. We need to go, I said, my voice tight with fear. Now. But as we turned to leave, the hallway seemed to stretch out before us, growing longer and longer. The exit we had come through is nowhere in sight. We're trapped, Chris muttered, his voice filled with panic. No, Jake said, shaking his head. There has to be a way out. We just need to keep moving. But no matter how far we walked, the hallway never seemed to end. The whispering grew louder, filling the air with its eerie, distorted pleas. Help us, join us. The walls around us seemed to pulse with the sound, the air growing colder with every step we took. My heart raced as I realized the truth. The hospital wasn't letting us leave. Hours, or maybe it was minutes, passed, but time seemed to warp inside the hospital. The longer we walked, the more it felt like the walls were closing in on us, like the hospital itself was alive, breathing, pulsating. The cold seeped into our bones, and that unnatural humming never stopped. Chris was the first to snap. "We're not getting out," he muttered, his voice shaky. "We're trapped here. We're going to die in here." "Shut up," Jake snapped, but there was no real conviction in his voice. We were all feeling it, the hopelessness, the dread. The hospital was playing with us, and it knew exactly how to break us down. It wasn't long before the hallucination started. It began with Emily. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring down the hallway, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "Do you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "See what?" I asked, following her gaze. "There's someone there." I squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing, just more of the same endless hallway. "There's no one there, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We're all on edge. Let's just keep moving." But she didn't budge. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They're watching us," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "They're waiting." Before I could respond, Chris let out a strangled scream. I turned just in time to see him stumble backward, his eyes wide with terror. "Get it off me!" he shouted, clawing at his neck. "It's crawling up my neck. There's nothing there." I shouted, grabbing his arms, trying to calm him down. But his panic was contagious, and soon we were all spiraling into fear. The hospital had us now, pulling us deeper into its web of madness. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows lengthening, and that voice, those eerie whispers, they grew louder. In our frenzied search for an escape, we found ourselves back in the room where we had discovered the body of Evan Walker. But this time, the room felt different, darker. The body bag was still there, but the air was thick with a new kind of malevolence. Emily stumbled forward, her eyes glassy. "It's in here. Something's in here." And then, for the first time, we saw it. A dark figure, standing in the corner of the room, its shape barely visible in the shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, red and piercing, as it watched us. I felt my stomach drop. "We need to go, now." But the door slammed shut again, trapping us inside. The figure moved forward, its presence suffocating. And then I saw it. Symbols, painted in what looked like blood, covering the walls. A circle in the center of the room, with symbols etched around it. A ritual room. Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't respond. It didn't need to. The whispers in the room answered for it. "Join us. Become one with us." I realized with a cold clarity that this wasn't just an abandoned hospital. This place had seen horrors, rituals, sacrifices, and we had walked right into the heart of it. Desperation took over. We needed to escape. I grabbed Jake by the arm, pulling him toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. Chris and Emily were screaming now, their eyes wild with terror. The dark figure moved closer, its footsteps echoing in the room. I could feel its gaze on me, burning, hungry. "We need to break the circle!" I shouted, "It's holding us here." But the second we stepped into the circle on the floor, the room seemed to tilt, and everything went black. When I woke up, the hospital was silent, empty. I was lying on the cold floor of the ritual room, the smell of blood and decay thick in the air. My friends were gone. Jake, Chris, Emily vanished. The door was open now. I stumbled out into the hallway, my body weak and shaking. The hospital was quiet, as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. I had felt it. When I reached the entrance, I heard a voice behind me. It was Jake's voice, but I didn't turn around. I knew it wasn't him. "We're waiting for you," the voice whispered. I walked out into the night, but I knew deep down that the hospital hadn't let me go. I was still inside it, and it was waiting.